going to hit record. Good to see everybody. Hey, Gabriel, how are you? And Dave, Jackson, good to see you again. Joyce, always good. Hey, Toby, what's up, man? Pacific Northwest there, and Steve.
Good morning.
Good to see you. Awesome. Okay, we'll give everybody another couple seconds here to get in the room, and then we'll go. What's up, Nils? Awesome, cool. I figured this would be a little bit more of an intimate group today, so I'm glad I get to lead this session. Cool. So our topic today is how to handle implementation and onboarding of customers, and particularly how is the CSM involved in that. And so, Marco, I love your background, man. I just saw that. That's pretty impressive. But the way we're going to do this is sort of the way we did it last week. If you were on the call, we're going to stick with this format. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to go with questions. So what questions or challenges are you all working on relative to this topic of handling onboarding and making sure that the CSM role is clear throughout the life cycle of the project. So we're going to go around and gather questions. If you would like to ask a question, it would be great if you could just use the raise hand functionality in the at the bottom of your screen. There's a little button that you can use to raise your hand. If you do that, I'll see you. You can come off mute. You can ask your question. We're going to capture all the questions, and then we'll go through and we'll start answering them and sharing what we're doing across our companies relative to onboarding in the CSM role. So who has a question? We'll start with Kathleen. Hey, Kathleen, how are you? Go ahead and ask your question.
Hello. Hi. My question is, how do you work with the sales team, both in an onboarding as well as a pre-onboarding capacity, to help win deals? Okay,
very good. How do you work with the sales team in a pre-onboarding or pre-sales capacity to help them win more deals? It's a great question. Okay, next one, Steve Schwartz. Come off mute.
Something I always struggle with in the small startup world: when is the right time to specialize an implementation or onboarding role? So currently our CSMs do everything.
Yep. Great question. Okay. So Steve, what other questions or challenges are folks working with right now? Joyce, what are you thinking right now?
Yeah, I'm with the last person who spoke. We're in the process of breaking it out. We're in a very early stage of where we call them customer success advocates, do everything. And just breaking out, I just started creating a process for onboarding and changing everything, and we're kind of slowly transitioning into different segments of the team, which is support, customer success, onboarding, training, which is part of onboarding.
Okay, perfect. Yep. Okay, so when are we going to start specializing those roles? This is a really good topic.
Yeah.
Gabriel, why don't you come off mute and ask your question or put your topic out there?
Yeah, definitely echo the last two people, 100%. So my question is not related to my current role, because I'm in the role where we do everything. But my last job, we had PMs and we had CSMs, and I used to actually be a project manager. And there was this tension because the client services team was just, the CSM team was just getting started, where it was like, who does the client belong to at what stage? Who's the primary owner of that relationship? And I remember there being tension where the PMs would be like, hey, during implementation, they're mine. Then we transition them over to you. So like, how do you guys navigate that part?
Very good. Okay. Yeah. So ownership of the relationship at each stage of the journey. Very, very good. Awesome. Emily, why don't you go ahead and come off mute?
All right. Hi, everybody. We are at a point, we have a lot of small customers, and we are at the point right now where our onboarding team is busting at the seams. So we need to scale our operations a little bit. And I wanted to just kind of survey the group here and see what parts of onboarding have you automated? Has anybody completely automated it for a segment? And if so, what tools are you using and how are you implementing that? We could use your advice on that.
Fantastic, which is a very good topic, especially for the SMB room. That's really good. Awesome. Okay. Are there any other questions out there or challenges that people are facing right now that you want to put on the table? Pinaki, go ahead.
Yeah, Jai. So my question here is how to step out from a implementation manager perspective, like when I started the onboarding, and how to draw the line where we are trying to get into implementation manager role, and how to come out from that side, because sometimes for SMB there is no partner and we don't know where to CSM from CSM side draw the line to not to get into implementation.
Okay, so I'm going to rephrase that and just make sure I understood it correctly. How do we draw the line between the implementation manager and the CSM?
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, so my company, we're a small team, like less than 60 company employees total, but we're switching to more of a product-led growth process, and part of that is building out our help center. So challenge I have is like, who owns that? Right now, I don't have like a technical writer. So it's someone on my CSM team that I think has the skills that really bode well, but how are you thinking about building out a help center where you don't have a team for it? So because I can't necessarily hire for it at this time.
Fantastic. So how do you think about building out that one-to-many tool set that you can use to scale a product-led growth kind of structure? That's great. Awesome. Okay, and let's see. We've got Patty.
Yeah, and quickly, I'm on board with moving into a customer onboarding manager role. I actually created that for our company. My question parlaying on top of that would be, secondarily, how then do you track it via technology? Are you doing that within a CRM? Are you guys, at what point do you make that secondary expense charge to bring in some additional technology to automate?
Very good. Okay, yeah. So how are we going to automate that and bring in technology to track and manage the onboarding process? Fantastic topic. Okay, awesome. Okay, does anybody else have any other topics before we jump in? I'll give you one last chance here. Betty, go ahead. You can come off mute. Hi.
Hi, everyone. My question is actually similar to Emily's. We're in a place right now where we're also busting at the seams with our CSMs and the SMB team. And so we're moving more towards like a blended human tech touch with webinars with our onboarding, things like that. And so is anyone using a pooled CSM approach, and how do you handle that handoff between sales and CSMs? Like when it's going from a dedicated salesperson to not quite such a dedicated individual helping them.
Yeah, that's a big transition, right? They get high touch during, okay, yeah, that's really good. High touch during the sale and then pooled touch during post-sale. Okay, awesome. Marco, go ahead and throw yours out, buddy.
Yeah, kind of going off what Betty said, maybe this is maybe slightly different conversation, but not along the lines of not only onboarding, but how do you offboard customers, from when they're in that more of a dedicated CSM role, more of a tech touch automated CSM type of process model? How do we do that? I'd be interested to hear some thoughts around that.
And when you say offboard, Marco, can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yeah. So essentially, if they have customers are typical or used to a dedicated CSM, and then maybe now it's not so much of a dedicated CSM resource, you're handing them off to more of a automation type of tech touch, and maybe there is a human interaction in regards to that, but it's not a proactive CSM that they're typically used to based on their criteria and segmentation you have.
So you're transitioning them from a high touch model to a lower touch model, which a lot of companies are trying to do to improve their efficiency and broaden the number of accounts. I completely get it. Okay, that's a great topic. Tricky balance there. All right, last call for topics. We got a bunch of good ones. I hope we can get to most of these. Any other topics before we transition? Okay. So let's go back to the top here, and we'll start with Kathleen's question. How are you working with sales to make sure that you get involved, even before the deal closes. Is that something that you're doing today, or how are you getting information across that transition? I like to call it a transition, not a handoff, because it really is just one team to the next. It's not like the customer's going to a different company. So who especially in the SMB side here, who's got a good plan in place? Like, what is the solution that you've put in place for that transition? Marco, your hand is still up. Do you want to speak to that, or is that for the last question?
No, this is for this question. One of the things that we've done actually is within our CRM tool, we use Salesforce today, is part of the process of closing the opportunity from the sales side is they have to put the specific reason of why they bought the product. So we're tracking the why behind they bought the product in the first place. So that is a transition, whether it's an account that has services, the project manager picks that up, and then they have the call and say, okay, here's the outcome that we understand that you want to achieve as you launch the product. Is this correct? Yes. We'll make sure that you achieve that outcome through your services engagement. And if they don't have services and it goes through an onboarding CSM or our CSM team, we have that information and we validate that with the customer before we begin any conversation around what they're trying to do with the product. We just want to make sure we're solving their first initial outcome. And the best way that we've been able to do that is basically putting in an opportunity and requiring sales to fill that out before they can close it out.
So that's a required field. There's a rule there, and sales has to put that in. Do you find that you get good data out of doing that?
Yeah, it takes some training and education, obviously, with the sales group, but having specific drop down, it depends on how complex your product is as well, right? But, having specific drop downs for them to choose from of the common ones of why people buy is helpful. That spawns some good feedback there. But for the most part, we do get good information, and it's a great conversation point to start off as you're onboarding your new customers.
Very good. So you're being prescriptive with the sales team, not leaving it open-ended. You probably get better adoption because of that. That's great.
Yeah.
Stacy, why don't you come off of mute and tell us what you're doing about this?
Yeah, what we do with our sales team is prior to the kickoff with the customer is actually meet with the sales engineer, the pre-sales engineer, and the account executive with the CSM. And then there's if our technical part and cover that Marco was just talking about, where we find out what they purchased, why they purchased, and what their expectations are, so that, when we get into the kickoff with the customer, they don't have to go through all that information second, third, fourth time. We will also get information, kind of those nuanced things around just what are the politics like? Is this a highly engaged customer? Are they really quiet? Do they prefer email versus phone? All of those things that are difficult to convey in just a document in Salesforce. This is one of those things where as we look to scale, we may not be able to do this kind of a detailed handoff for every single customer, but we will definitely be continuing that for our larger, the customers on the larger end of our dollars ARR.
Is there a specific threshold that you use to determine that today, when you'll have that meeting versus when you won't?
Right now, we're doing it for all of them. What I would anticipate is the top 2/3 that we would continue that with. We have a minimum order quantity or dollar amount for orders. If it's if it's our partners, we don't do it because partners take care of that. But in general, I would think that we're going to probably do that for the top 2/3 and continue that for the things that are in the bottom third. Probably won't do a detailed. We would just ask the sales team to fill out the information best of their ability and go from there.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Walter, why don't you come off mute and tell us what you guys are doing with your new clients as they're coming across?
So currently, kind of interesting. It's just very, very similar to that as well. We are, like Stacey, we usually try and have a conversation with the sales rep prior to the initial onboarding call with them, and try and kind of get some of the politics of, reasons for buying. There's a lot of times where some of the information is kind of a quick sell, from web to lead kind of deal. And some of that information isn't. They're like, yeah, we're just ready to purchase. Let's go ahead and do this. And then those we still try and uncover with the customer on the first call.
Okay. That's great. Yeah. So in general, it sounds like this prescriptive approach can work really, really well, almost like a survey approach. And the smaller the customers are, it's probably the more appropriate tool to use. But then as they get larger, and I think everybody selected into this room for 50K and below. So if you have a 50K client, there's probably a little bit of a higher touch transition that needs to happen. Kathleen, do you have something else to add there?
Yeah, I do. I love hearing that other people are engaging with sales. As somebody who has both training as a sales and a CS professional, I think it's an untapped relationship, and we tend to get in silos. But for us, one thing that we did when I worked at some of the smaller companies was it was more ad hoc, but we never got a chance to formalize it. But we would, if sales is having a hard time closing a deal, like one thing we would do occasionally to build urgency is say, hey, like, why don't we have a quick 15-minute meeting with the stakeholders, let them know what the onboarding is going to be. And if anything, I like that because that gives you an opportunity to set all the expectations that we were talking about last week of like making sure you have a good, like you get adoption and things like that. But you can also help close the deal, and it's a way to start building that relationship early. So I don't know if anyone else is doing that, but it's something that I found that really helps build urgency, breaks down the silo, but also helps, all around.
Yeah. So you're talking about engaging directly with the client before the deal closes. Yeah.
Yeah. Not in every case, but for especially for bigger deals, I think it's really, really, can be really effective.
Yeah. And as you earn trust with the sales team, then they're going to want to pull on you more and more for that because they'll see that it's actually helping their close rates.
Yeah. It shows that everyone cares and that you're really trying to do what's best for the customer, which is always, I think, the most important thing to do.
Yep. Very good. Okay, cool. So Kathleen, it sounds like there's lots of good input there into your question. So let's move on to the next one. And this is a really meaty one, right? When is the right time to specialize? So I think what we see is as companies form, CSM team is sort of the fledgling first members of that team are doing a little bit of everything. They're doing support, maybe a little bit of account management, maybe renewals, identifying upsells. They're basically helping figure out what the customer success motion should look like. So when do you start splitting these out? Who has sort of recently gone through this that would want to speak about this and talk about how did you decide to split CSM from implementation, for example? I think that was the initial question, but we could also talk about how you decide support, how you decide other roles in the post-sale organization. Anybody want to raise their hand? If not, I'll go ahead and call on somebody. Okay, Patty, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, and so as mentioned, when I came in, I'm director of customer success, company that has offices in the UK and the US. And when I came in, the CSMs were already underwater with the amount of customers they have. About 120 that range anywhere from 500 to 10,000 MRR. And so looking at what they're doing and trying to figure out how to make them more efficient, it quickly became known that they were not spending enough time on the onboarding customers, and it was creating a bad customer experience coming in. And so with customer experience being the forefront of the thought for the customer, that needed to be taken care of. And so I implemented it in the UK, and we've since implemented it in the US as well. And we now have a customer onboarding manager role, and it has specific processes. It has weekly check-ins where, again, our call cadence is more 4 to 6 weeks, depending on size, for CSMs. As you're going through and during the onboarding process, you're touching the data team to set up the cube, you're touching the training team, you needed that project manager. And so if you have different touch points throughout your onboarding process and you need those weekly, the weekly insight into where they're at that point is where I would really recommend putting that person into play. So it doesn't, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a number of clients, because you could have 200 clients and 2 CSMs and be fine. And that role still could be very important. It's a different skill.
Sorry, Peggy. That was my fault.
All good. It's more project management based for the onboarding, walking them through exactly where they're going. Also, if anything wrong happens within the onboarding, it's a fresh start with the CSM. So if at all possible, I would always recommend it based on those. And I'm a firm believer of using people to their skill set.
Patty, how did you determine that onboarding was the thing that needed to be solved for?
Seeing customers come in, and as soon as they would go live, the CSMs were scrambling. Even though they were the ones that onboarded them, they weren't asking the right questions always, because there wasn't a process in place before I came in. And then even when there was a process, they're like, I don't have time to spend the necessary hours with these onboarding clients. And you need to start a customer on the right foot. If they come in angry, then their renewal and retention rate, which I know we're all focused on, is going to take a hit come a year or 2 year, however long their contract is.
Yeah, exactly. Lauren, why don't you come off mute and tell us what you're thinking here?
Hi, I'm often joining as the first or second or third CS hire, and I've developed this habit, and it works really well, of getting temps by contract to take the reactive support work off of our plates as soon as possible. So it's, even if I'm the first hire, you know, in a customer facing role, I've gotten a person or a team of people under me who are low cost, quick onboarding. They just need basic kind of technical familiarity, but no real, it's, you know, with my software platforms I've worked with, it hasn't had to be super analytical or technical. So really easy roles to fill, no commitment to another headcount, to start even teaching the rest of the business that customer success is more proactive, more big picture, more strategic than just executing on requests for customers. So that's been kind of my play. It's much easier to get buy-in from leadership when it's bringing a temp on. And often, actually, a couple of times that temp has turned full-time because it's become so valuable. So
that is really cool, Lauren. I mean, that's a great technique that everybody should think about, but you get a chance to demonstrate what the difference looks like between reactive and proactive. I like that a lot. Christine Popovich, why don't you come off and tell us what you've done here?
Hi, I'm the first hire, similar to Lauren's position. We did do some temps, but I found that when we started to specialize was when I started to break. So kind of how Patty would go in and like see, you know, what are people struggling with? I just approached my CEO and I said, hey, in 3 months, I'm no longer going to be able to do this. Let's speed up the hiring process and fill this gap, because I'm getting pretty close to a breaking point. So I was doing like marketing, which was really developing into improving the product experience, because we don't have a product manager or a project manager. So I felt I was just kind of juggling too much. And so today I would say I focused mostly on just improving the product experience. And the way that I was able to accelerate the hiring plan was using tools like Full Story. So basically showing them, hey, we have like a dozen customers that are running into the same problems. I'm trying to dedicate resources to improving these kind of fall-offs and drop-offs, but I'm spending a lot of time developing content to keep our core user base engaged. And so when I was able to prove that, because my C-level team, they're all engineers. So when I was able to kind of show them behind the scenes the exact patterns that the users kept falling into, I think that kind of proved the case, and we did get a marketer on board, and that really did unlock a lot of time on my side. So as I'm still the only CS, and it's still really challenging, and I still see a need for a product manager, but I can fill it in the interim, and I think our next person we bring on will be a product manager.
So that's great, because it might not just be implementation, support, customer success. It's actually other responsibilities in these early stage companies too, like marketing, to your point. So that's really good. And I like the way you use data to make a case, and data really resonates with the engineering types. So that's awesome technique, Christine. Nils, why don't you come off mute?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. So having, I'm not going through this right now, but in prior roles as VP of CS, I went through this and split off onboarding multiple times, and found that there was a couple key drivers for that. The primary ones were really speed and specialization of strengths. So the skill set, building on what Patty was saying, the skill set that's required to drive an onboarding program is fundamentally different than the skill set that's required to build engaging and long-term value-based relationships with customers. And that came to a head at one company prior, where our CSMs were doing soup to nuts the whole show, and it was actually the exact opposite of Patty's situation. They were actually focusing all their time on the onboarding because it was so intense, and we actually had an opt-out clause at 60 or 90 days, that they were neglecting all the ongoing work with the customers thereafter. So, I saw this. One, it was impossible to make a change when we had 10 people doing the same thing, quote unquote, a little bit differently. And so when we specialized, we all of a sudden gained a tremendous amount of speed, because all the changes and all the control and all how every customer went through onboarding was down to just 1 or 2 people. And we could make changes very, very fast, iterate very quickly, and we had a much higher level of consistency in the delivery of our solution, as opposed to before, where if we tried to roll out a change, it was many weeks and everybody still interpreted it a little differently. So, looking at that signal to noise ratio, it is high when everybody's doing everything. And I know it's always a bit of a challenge to take one person off and dedicate them to that. But the efficiency and the speed that you gain certainly was always a worthwhile exercise, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the personality types between an implementation person and a CSM are actually pretty unique as well. So to find somebody who can actually be good is sort of like a unicorn kind of role, right, Nils? And
I think pretty much all of CS is a unicorn. Well, especially in the early days.
We're all unicorns, 100%. Right? Where's Andrew Marks right now?
Yeah, right.
Right. Okay, great. So some really good items there. Using data. Start with carving off support. I really like what Lauren said there. Start to determine where those choke points are, and where we can start to, even in a small team, you can start to concentrate some of the responsibility for those different kinds of motions into different people. But there are different metrics, right? Different metrics to measure the productivity of those processes. So that's good. So nobody else has their hands raised. We'll go ahead to the next topic here, which is the question or the challenge that Gabriel brought up. How do you and it sort of dovetails a little bit here too. How do you differentiate between a PM and a CSM? So I worked with a company not too long ago that had, basically said the same thing that Gabriel said, almost word for word, which is, if I'm the PM and I'm responsible for getting that customer from, point 0 to live as quickly as possible, I don't want anybody else interfering with this customer during that time. So what is the role of the CSM versus the PM? Like, how do you differentiate there? Nathan, I'm going to call on you and see if you've got anything to share with us from your experience.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of experience actually in this specifically. I think for the current company that I'm working for, the PM is kind of like the AE, right? The account executive, and so it's kind of more of a sales handoff to the CSM. There is still that kind of like CSM. We pull things through, especially for enterprise customers or larger customers with more needs and stuff. But for the AE, their of course goal is to get them onboarded, right? Like, I want to make the commission, so let's get this done. Don't get in my way, make this happen. And so definitely we've had to work hard at making sure that we're setting those expectations, which I think will probably come up in some of the other questions we have about, hey, how do we set those expectations on the front end? How do we make sure that we actually accomplish those goals, right? And actually get them to the right spot, get the customer to the right spot and happy, but also make sure that we deliver on a timetable that works for our PMs or our AEs.
Yeah, it's interesting how you've got the AE sort of playing that role, because their comp must be dependent on it, is what my guess is. Cool. Jeff, why don't you come off mute and tell us what you're doing?
Yeah, so in terms of like PMs on the product side, I think it depends on how customer facing they are, is how comfortable I'll be with them being part of the conversation. So I always look at it like the CSM should be your true partner, and I'm bringing in the PM to help facilitate the conversation, and it's a partnership. I would be concerned if you're having a silo conversation from a PM and the CSM and they're not talking. So I think that to me it's just an alignment. The CSM is the quarterback, and the quarterback puts everyone in the position they need to be and educates the customer on what this person's role is. I do believe that a PM should have a direct line to customers. I don't think that the CSM has to be the middle person. So I always make sure that the customer knows that they can reach out directly to that person. They can schedule calls, but it really needs to be a team effort.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm curious how many people are doing it that way. CSM introduces PM as opposed to sales team introduces PM and then PM introduces CSM. So maybe some other folks could hit on that as you talk, because I think there's some challenges in
Hey
there.
Jay, can you clarify one thing? When you say PM and in this question, are we talking project manager or are we talking product manager? In the original question, I thought it was project manager given the implementation nature, but I wasn't sure if we were talking product manager.
That's what I thought we were talking about, is project manager. So implementation project manager.
So to correct that, I was talking about product manager. So my apologies on that.
Good catch.
So now you guys know how I'll manage product.
Hey, that's good. They're closely aligned. Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you for that, Nils. That's perfect clarification. Joel, why don't you come off? Joel Shum, come off mute and tell us what you're doing.
All right. All right. Hello, everyone. Jay, I really appreciate this. This is actually my first live video chat. So this is a lot of good stuff that Patty, Lauren, Christine, and everyone are mentioning. And I find it really interesting because I've had teams in many different roles of, Jay, what you said, new sales being handed over to the project manager, then the project manager handing it over to the customer success manager. So to touch base on the project manager and the customer success manager differentiation, I've seen it both ways, where the project manager solely owns it from A to Z. And the CSM does not get involved until that go live happens. But there again, I've also seen it elaborated on, or more involvement company-wide, where there's specific individuals for implementations or your project PMs. There's your CSM, which is solely tied to your I want to say more add-on service trainings. There's your sales or your account managers that are involved. There's specific retention teams that are more so like a CrossFit or a hybrid position, focusing on your ARR or renewal, but then tying that into also your AM. And then there's your professional services. So I think it's an interesting topic from where the business is at and how many headcounts you can have for that entire process. And I think everyone that has mentioned on this call is touch points are key. There's a lot of automation that's happening, but it's how many touch points do we need from those transitions?
Yeah, that's great. So have you seen which you've seen both models? Which is your preference for how that works? And obviously, the smaller a customer is, the fewer touch points with different people, the better, maybe. But how have you seen this work best, Joel?
Yeah. So in all honesty, it depends on the size of the business. If you have a customer base that has maybe say 500 or less, and you have a team of say 6 CSMs, I've seen it successful there because they have a finger on the pulse of their book of business and they can see it from A to Z. But if you have a business that has 7,000 customers, that's completely different. What I've seen successful in that is having your segmented sections with each team, and having a process put in place where that transition actually happens. And I don't know if it was Patty or one of the other, Jeff mentioned the Salesforce process of the transition over, of ensuring that those check marks are required fields for it to then transition to the next workflow or the next segmented group.
Yep, very good. I'm a strong believer in the idea that if you want the CSM to step in and solve a problem that may arise during implementation, that they need to have a relationship before you ask them to do that. So I'm a little bit biased toward sales introduces CSM and the PM at the same time, or CSM introduces PM. But love the idea of tracking. If we're not tracking, it's really hard to manage that process.
Sure.
Gabriel, why don't you come off mute and tell us what you're doing in this area?
Yeah, no, really like what people are sharing. I like the concept, and I would agree that, you know, having the CSM as the owner, if you have all those roles defined and them introducing the other people, keeps a clear line of contact and understanding for the client. I thought of sharing what my previous employer would do in case other people are doing this, is that they started off with just a PM team and support team. They didn't have CSMs, and the CSMs actually came out of the PM team, because all of that lived within client services. So you were promoted from support to PM to CSM. So there was an interesting, and I'm sharing this to say that I feel like adaptability is key, because there was an interesting relationship when you maybe had a CSM who was previously a PM and has been technically has more PM experience than you do. And we had certain CSMs that, you know, were brought in for very high level clients, large accounts. And so they would take ownership from the start, while with smaller clients, there was maybe more of that segmented transition, because there wasn't as much of a need for the CSM to be involved. And we made it very clear, honestly, when I was a PM, for example, I would say, you know, hey, this has been great. Officially, the implementation is completed. You're ready to go live. Here's your CSM. He's in charge of keeping you happy. That's what I would always say. And, you know, and that worked out. But I feel like adaptability is key, because if you do have people that have transitioned through all those roles, they might be able to take more ownership as a CSM. And again, communication goes a long way, because if you work well together and you communicate, it can be helpful to have the CSM even assisting you in some of those PM roles, or the PM assisting in some of the CSM roles, as long as the line of contact is clear.
Yeah, very good. Like, one thing I want the group to maybe think about a little bit, and if somebody has some ideas on this, is what is the actual activity that we want a CSM to be doing during implementation? Is there a valuable role that they can play that doesn't get in the way of rolling out the software, right? So maybe would love to hear some thoughts on that. But Kelly Hook, we haven't heard from you yet. Why don't you come off mute and tell us what you're doing?
Yeah, it's been great to hear everyone. We're actually, for context, I'm at a startup supply chain in San Francisco. I'm head of CS, but I'm new to the role as of a year. We are in the middle of working on our onboarding experience and our customer journey end to end right now, and we're figuring everything out. We also just went through some tough decisions with COVID. So we lost some team members, but I just took on 2 onboarding architects, and we've now combined the entire post-sales cycle into CS, the CS function. So implementation technically now sits under me, but we're trying to move to a very low-touch automated process. We're a SaaS company, and we used to be more on the professional services side, so it's been an interesting transition. Our prior customer base of about 40 customers all came from a high-touch experience with us. So I'm moving them into a more automated process, while I'm taking on new customers that have joined with a more self-service mentality. And we're just figuring it out. The role that sits under me now is called an onboarding architect, and they came from a project management background. They're also very technical and domain experts, so they're pretty excellent, but it's hard to shift them out of the professional services mentality and into this idea of looking at where they are repeating themselves and turning that into an automated kind of scalable process. We're pretty weak on documentation. We just downloaded or we just installed Pendo to create guides within our product for the user. So we're trying to turn customer questions into guides and more robust documentation. We are trying to map out the customer journey and identify the time it takes at each step and points of friction, and then figure out ways that we can automate and guide the customer at those stages. But I've just been enjoying listening to everyone's thoughts, and we're definitely in learning mode and fast iteration mode over here.
Awesome. It sounds like you're taking a multi-pronged approach for sure, and all the changes that you're putting in place. That's great. Okay. I think we've got time for about one more topic, and this is one that I want to make sure we get to, because I think it's there's a lot here is, you know, what parts of this process are folks automating today? You know, one of the most interesting questions that I've been asked is, how do you take something like a success plan that you normally think of as a really high touch thing and automate that, you know, to scale to SMB, like your long tail customers? Like, how can we do that? But then even what Kelly just brought up around using Pendo to put guides in the system, what tools and technologies are you putting in place to help scale this process overall, starting from the beginning? So Chris Jones, I'm gonna pick on you. Why don't you lead us off here?
Assume that I was here, Jay. Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, I work for a more, I guess I'd say, somewhat established organization. So a lot of our documentation, unfortunately, are things that are handed down to us. Right now, we are going through a really rough time because we're trying to ramp up in terms of our CST. And what we do have is that we work a lot in, as a lot of organizations do, in Word documents and Excel documents, and everything is disjointed. And then you have a few things in Salesforce and 15 other different programs. So right now, unfortunately, I don't think we have one central location where we do, in terms of documentation, rolling those out to customers or even internally. So from my standpoint, yeah, right now it's more piecemeal. Everybody does their thing. We're trying to get things done. So
okay,
much to add on that.
No, that's great. Okay, cool. So in any other technologies that folks are using to automate and scale onboarding is, you know, the topic. So Kathleen, why don't you come off mute and tell us what you're doing there?
Yeah, so I think sometimes, especially, it really depends on how much money your company is willing to spend on tools. I was never somebody that had any of those like CS tools like Gainsight, never had that. I mean, I think it's as simple as, like, there's certain things that you want to be templatized. So you talk your like any sort of like handoff or, you know, intro to the customer, setting up, you know, onboarding sessions, training sessions. Those are the kind of things that you can templatize, and you can just use Google. I just use, we always had Gmail typically, and so I just do that, just so it was just one less thing to worry about. I think that the stuff that you want to spend time on is, you know, after you've had that onboarding meeting, like maybe you have a template of like, this is what we covered, but then obviously going in there and customizing it for the customer. And also I think, you know, for ongoing meetings with customers, like having a template, a base template that you can customize of, this is what we talked about, these are the things, just to really to save yourself time. I think I've never heard of anyone saying, oh, our CS people have way too much time on their hands. I've never heard that from any company. So I think it's really important to cut corners where you know it's going to be effective, but then, you know, obviously understand the importance of customization, you know, where it really counts.
Good. Okay. Jeff Heckler, we haven't heard from you. Maybe you could tell us what you're looking at in terms of automation for onboarding tools.
Sure. Appreciate this group. This is my second week in here. It's been a joy. This is great mind share. I just recently joined, and what we're trying to do is we have a unique issue where we have about 92,000 customers, and we deal with about 30%, which are a threshold of 400 in MRR and higher. So a much different animal than anything I've tackled in the past. And so the threshold is above that is about, like I said, 3% and 3,000 customers, and that's all very high human touch. We're trying to touch the Jesus out of the remaining 91,000, and so we're looking at a bunch of different ways, and we just started to get under this. We also have a paralleling problem, which I posted in chat, in regards to our product line is going from 1 to 4, and the technical capabilities of our product line is exploding with an acquisition as well as some other things. So we're looking at a PS org, and I have experience with that, and that's how we got into software and SaaS in the beginning. And so we're looking to build a PS inside of customer success, and then we're looking at what I'd like to covertly do is get our lead into a C-level position with the customer officer position. So, but in regards to the automation, we're just trying to work on our own playbooks, automating those through our CS platform, which we're bringing in-house, and then building that out as a project management tool. And beyond that, looking at different ways that I like the other, someone had chimed in about the temp model to bring a human touch onto the onboarding process. So we're doing that and building that out right now. So that will be, and then we have career paths that start from that. Because when I came in, we just had CSMs, and they did everything from the largest to the smallest and everything in between technically. And we can't do that. We need to segment our customers by verticals in their industries, by their size, as well as their technologies. And so the automation process in regards to dealing with, we're trying to build repetitive educational materials as well. I think I heard that one of the people chimed in regards to that. We're doing canned webinars, a lot of educational materials, and trying to build out those processes. So.
Okay, that's great. Well, would love to hear more about how you're building the tools in-house or bringing the tools in-house for the CS platform and automating that engagement. So thank you for contributing, Jeff. Awesome. Okay, well, I think we're about out of time in here, so we're going to pop over to the other room. If everybody could just do that for a few minutes, and we'll wrap up. But great discussion today. Thank you guys for your engagement. It was really good. See you over in the main room.
Good to see you as well. I didn't get to see everybody earlier because my video's off. You know, Austin, I see you down there with your beard, Austin Shrum.
What's up, Jeff?
How's it going? Perfect. And I think we've got Jay. Looks like we've got Cheryl back. Perfect. Well, we've got a few minutes left. Jay, let's start with you, and maybe tell us a couple of the themes that came out in the discussion in the SMB room, and maybe one key takeaway that you feel like the group can leave with.
Yeah, so again, our group is SMB focused, so smaller customers in general, and had some really interesting questions or challenges that came out. So one is like, how do you work with sales to get CSMs engaged even in the pre-sales phase, which I know is an enterprise level question or challenge as well. When is the right time to specialize? When do you start separating your implementation, project management, consulting type roles from your CSM and even support? We had a really interesting thing come out. Lauren Mecca talked about her strategy of basically starting with always when she's usually the first or second CSM to join a company. And when she does, her first play that she makes is to go get a temp with a soft cost associated with it to carve off all that reactive support work from her plate. And so there's a couple of benefits to that. One is it's a soft cost, so it's not bringing in a new headcount to the organization, so it's typically well received by the management team. And then she gets a chance to demonstrate what proactivity looks like. So for me, that was a big takeaway of our group, and a good example of how you start to specialize very quickly, even in an early stage situation. And then we talked about doing everything, PMs who do everything versus who does the customer actually belong to? Who owns the relationship at what point in time? So we talked a little bit about whether sales should be introducing a project manager, and then project manager should be introducing a CSM at the end of that implementation cycle, or whether sales should be introducing the CSM and then being the quarterback and then bringing the PM in and already having a relationship there for things that may come up during implementation. So really great discussion around that piece. It seems in our group where a lot of people are forming and trying to figure this out in real time right now. So it was really, really timely discussion. And then we started to get into talking about technologies that we're using to automate and scale onboarding. We didn't have a ton of time to get into a lot of a deep conversation about that, but we heard from one person that is working on scaling their long tail, which is 90,000 customers in their long tail. So wow. They've got some cool challenges there. And then we heard a little bit about people using Pendo and some other tooling there. So those were some of the questions we got to in our group.
That's great. That's perfect. Cheryl, why don't you come off mute and talk a little bit about, same thing, a couple themes and maybe a takeaway that you heard from the enterprise group.
Yeah, so it's interesting, you know, all of the questions sort of flowed from one to the other, and there's a lot of similarities between questions and between enterprise and what I just heard from Jay in on the SMB side. You know, the questions around, you know, actually started from how do you ensure the right communication from sales. There were questions around you know, success plans and how does that fit into the handoff process. And there were even questions around, which Jay had touched on, how do you start to break out if you have one person handling everything? How do you start to break out and have, you know, two teams, and how do you justify that? And so, you know, to your leadership team, so you can start to be adding that, and then tools and technology. What are people using? And you know, it seems like many of the teams are charging for onboarding and have very, you know, clear deliverables. And Christy actually had a great process where the sales team can't actually market closed won until all of, you know, specific information has been provided as part of the handoff, and have a clear handoff process so that when you have the first call with the customer, and everybody pretty much sounds like they do this, the first call with the customer, you're confirming information rather than asking a lot of questions, so the customer feels heard, you know, and they're not necessarily repeating themselves. And we are seeing on the enterprise side, the CSM is getting involved more towards the end, or at least the concept of what is customer success is being introduced during the sales process. So it's clear there's an understanding of what your CSM will be doing with you when the deal is closed.
That's great. I would expect nothing less from Christy. She normally has all of her ducks in a row, so I like that. Well, again, appreciate everybody spending an hour with us. I know this tends to fly by as you know, the more and more that we do these, an hour doesn't seem like long enough. But we are going to respect everybody's time. We've got about a minute left. Just a couple of quick notes again. We're going to obviously be here next week, same time, 11:30. We're going to be looking at executive dashboards and thinking about that from an internal perspective. So trying to give you guys a little bit more time to maybe think and put some time into that topic, spread the word as well. And then in terms of our community launch, we're going to launch our online community in 2 weeks, June 11th. If you're curious now, if you're not already signed up, feel free to go to community.customerimperative.com, sign yourself up, go in there. There's been some great content. We have some really awesome contributors so far. Kevin Leonar, Christy Falterusto, Jeremy Donaldson's in there. Trying to think other people on the screen that I noticed. Dan Maldonado's in there. So there's really good stuff. And we're going to start launching that out to the public. So we're going to hopefully grow that. We started with 150 people. We've got about 4,000 ready to go next after that. So hopefully we're going to start to scale that and really get a diversity of opinions and voices. So appreciate everybody's time. We'll see you guys next week, and hope everybody has a great weekend.
Awesome.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you all.